Thank you all so much for choosing to devote your time to this incredible topic. My name is Phillip Lomax. I am the Executive Vice President of MediaScience. What we do at MediaScience is we quantify context in the new media landscape. And I'm going to share with you about how we do that, why it's important, and why I think this is the future of how we communicate value to the marketplace. I'll share a brief background of my story, and then I'll introduce my colleagues who will join me on the stage, so to speak, today. We're going to have about a 40-minute conversation. We're going to talk about a lot of very interesting topics, from audio to B2B to video in the new media landscape. And then we're going to take you on a tour of our laboratory, right? So right now you're in our executive area. Thank you for being here. And then we're going to go into our data collection area. We're going to show you our mock living room environments, our control room, our focus group room, and then at the tail end of this event, we'll do networking. Right? So we'll make a little bit more space out here for us, and then we can network between the participant area and the executive area. And please feel free to enjoy as much food and drink as you can have. With that, I'm going to sit and I'm going to chat with you for a bit. Okay? Great. So my story begins in 2019. I was at the top of Marina-based Sands in Singapore, looking out at the skyline. And actually, I was kind of freaking out, to be honest. I had just attended that day the Global Restaurant Leadership Conference. And what I saw on stage were insights professionals and logistics professionals talking about just how fragile the global restaurant economy was. And certainly, this is in 2019, before the global pandemic. And I realized that I was at a crossroads, because just 6 months earlier, I was in Rome, Italy, attending the Neuromarketing World Forum. And I recognized what I saw on stage, the use of neuroscientific tools to measure humans while they consumed television and social media, presented by some of the largest technology companies in the world, like Google and Facebook. So certainly, while I was at Uber, I recognized that Uber itself was not just a digital container for restaurant advertisements. It was so much more. It was a brand. So I began to be very interested in applying science to understand human perception. And I discovered MediaScience. MediaScience started out as the Disney Media and Advertising Laboratory in 2008, just as I was graduating high school. Dr. Dwayne Varan, our founder and CEO, was an academic, and he founded the Interactive Television Research Institute at Murdoch University in Perth, Australia. He was doing cutting-edge research around the future of television, interactivity, connected television. TVs would be connected to the internet, and this is even before the mobile phone, right, went iPhone, so to speak. So all of these are implications in terms of the viewer's experience. And what we're really doing here at MediaScience is we're quantifying, right? So there's a difference between qualitative research and quantitative research. We're quantifying context. Now let's focus on context. Context starts at the user need state, right? We want things. That's why we interface with them, right? We want entertainment. We want cognitive engagement with news, as an example. We go to these platform experiences to activate a certain need state that we have. It starts at the device. It goes down to the program, right? So some of us watch Netflix, some of us watch Hulu, etc. It goes down to the program. Right? So some of us want to watch news, as an example. Some of us watch sports, as an example. It goes down further to the ad format, the way that we display advertisements within the program. And then certainly, through the ad format, we serve the creative. And if you think about it, the purpose of advertising is to build and refresh memory structures. The way that we perceive brands, the way that we perceive humans, the way that we perceive the world is through context, where the brand shows up, what the brand looks like, the brand's distinct assets, right? These are all of the things that shape the perceptions that we have of brands in this entire global economy. And that's exactly what was fascinating to me about media science. Now I'd like to talk about the tools that we use, because that's really, I think, one of the reasons why you're here. We believe in a toolbox approach, right? Because humans are multidimensional. Attention as a construct, right, is actually an unstable construct. Just because I have your attention, so to speak, you're looking at me right now, you're going in and out of focus, right? So if we can look at this architecturally, right, we can recognize that there are really 4 flaming hoops that we need to jump through in order to achieve impact. It starts first with presence and viewability. Was a human there in the first place? Let's quantify that. We can quantify it mechanically. We can quantify it by looking at you here, right? The next step is attention, right? We need to achieve attention, but attention is a gate. It's a threshold, so to speak. Once I've achieved your attention, I need to really perform for you, right? I need to communicate in ways that achieve your focus in order to achieve a memory structure, right? So presence and viewability, attention, and the converse, of course, is inattention, which is a stable construct. If you're not looking at me, you're definitely not focusing on what I'm talking about, right? But you might be listening to me, right? So eye tracking might not be the end-all be-all measure of attention as a construct. Then I need to direct your focus, right? Depending on the architecture of programming experiences, and I'll give an example to make it a little bit less sciencey, I suppose, right? We need some mental breaks as well, right? So NFL football, as an example, it's a fantastic sport. And why is that? It's because we focus a limited amount of, attention, and then we take a mental break, and we go back into the game, and we take a break. So actually, advertisements, when it comes to linear, as an example, it's actually an ideal structure because we want a mental break from the programming. And in the age of streaming, certainly there are implications. And then at the end of the day, there's actual impact, right? So I believe that the advertising industry is not here to just serve advertisements. I believe that the advertising industry is a noble industry. And I believe that our goal is to help our clients create influence within the marketplace. And all the different platforms that we have available to us are different levers that we can use that have different powers, right? Some have powers in terms of cognition. Some have powers in terms of excitement, right? Depending on our goals as professionals, as brands, we need to leverage these powers to achieve our objectives. And I do think that we should talk about this fundamentally at a scientific plane, so to speak, because the use of classical experimental design and these deep methodologies provide us with principles that we can rely on time and time again, and they just work over and over and over again. So what I've shared thus far is a few different things. I've talked with you about the architecture of viewing experiences and context. What I haven't talked about just yet are some of our methods. High-level overview, and then we'll have our guests on stage. At MediaScience, we use medical-grade infrared eye tracking to see precisely where audiences are looking at on their screens. For how long are they fixating on specific brand assets, as an example? We also use heart rate data. And what we're looking at is cardiac deceleration, the slowing of the heart, which is an indication of cognitive processing. Are we actually looking at something and consuming the thing that we're looking at in order to create a memory structure, right? We're also looking at sweat activity, right? Which might sound gross, but all of us are sweating constantly. Sweat activity is an indication of response intensity, right? So it's not good response or bad response. It's just how strongly are we responding to that touchdown during Q4 in the Super Bowl? Or how strongly are we responding to, that really loving scene right, at a wedding, as an example. Facial expression analysis, right? So the proper term here is valence. Are we laughing when it's supposed to be funny? Are we frowning? Are we confused? And then sometimes we also use electroencephalography, EEG, right? So EEG are electrical signals in the brain. This is a highly complex measure, right? And what we're looking for is mental approach or mental withdrawal from a given subject. This is great for things like news, as an example. And then let me finally establish my credibility, I suppose. I've been with the company for 5.5 years. I've been lucky enough to be mentored by Dr. Dwayne Varan, the founder and CEO. And in some ways, he's become more than a boss to me. I've literally listened to the thousands of adventures that he's been on around this subject matter. And we work with some of the largest media companies in North America. We were founded as the Disney Media and Advertising Lab, and we were exclusive with Disney for our first 5 years in business. Today, I work with 9 out of the 10 leading streaming services in North America. I work with nearly every major social media platform in North America. OEMs, which are platforms like Samsung and LG. Gaming is a bright up-and-coming opportunity with Roblox and Twitch, and so many more in technology. So if you would like to have a chat with me afterwards, I'd be very happy to converse with you. I think we've got about like 60 people here, so I'm grateful for all of you being here. And with that, I'd love to host my dear friends and colleagues on the stage. Please join me. Maybe it was a little bit longer than 5 minutes. Sorry about that.
No worries. That was great.
You kept everybody paying attention.
I could certainly introduce all of you, but I'd love for you to go down the line, starting from you, Benjamin, and introduce yourselves, if that's all right.
Yeah, sure. Hello, everybody. I'm Ben Vandrick, VP of Measurement Strategy and Innovation at the VAB. VAB is the Video Advertising Bureau. If you're not familiar with us, we are an insights and advocacy organization, and our goal is to simplify the complex aspects of our industry and also illuminate and drive change by drawing attention to the most pressing and important topics facing the video advertising ecosystem today. Thanks so much for being here. Appreciate it. Thanks, Phillip.
Thank you, Ben.
I'm Steve Keller. I'm Sonic Strategy Director for Studio Resonate. Studio Resonate is an in-house audio-first creative agency that operates under the umbrella of SiriusXM. So we work with brands that advertise on any of our platforms: SiriusXM Satellite, Podcast Network, Pandora, SoundCloud, and others. And often when I introduce myself, people hear the title Sonic Strategy Director. 2 things usually happen. First is, cool title. Second thing is, but what the hell do you do? So the easiest way I've come up with to describe my job is to say I'm in the business of blending sound science with sound art to help folks make sound decisions, literally and figuratively. So it's working in everything from sonic marketing and identity to sonic experiences to sonic interventions. So that's a little bit about me.
Thank you for being here, Steve. Ty.
Hi, everyone. It's good to be with you. I'm Ty Heath. I'm director at the B2B Institute, LinkedIn's think tank, studying the science of brand building. So we're on a mission to build famous B2B brands. B2B is half the global economy, but if you ask people about different B2B brands, many people wouldn't recognize it, wouldn't even be connected to how much is moved by B2B. So we're on a mission to change that. We want B2B brands to be household names. So we study the science of effectiveness with leading experts and academics and bring it to life through research. And we've done wonderful research with MediaScience. Thank you so much for having us.
No, absolutely. I've brought you a group of all-stars, all right? It's up to you to take notes. We'd appreciate any photos or videos for us to be tagged online, et cetera. But we'd like to focus our conversation for the next 35 minutes or so. So, Steve, I want to start with you, because I think you do one of the most interesting things in this industry.
Weird.
No, not at all. Audio, I think that stat was that humans process audio something to the order of 100 times faster than video. Is that right?
Yeah, it's because of the way the neural pathways are put together. It reaches the precortical area faster. So our reflexive time response to what we hear is 20 to 100 times faster than what it is to what we see, which is probably evolutionary because our ancestors probably heard that thing that was about to eat them before they saw it. And so we just kind of developed this ability to react very quickly. So.
Let's unpack this a little bit further, right? Sound influences behavior at a subconscious level, right? So can we use sound to influence our audiences at a non-conscious level, Steve?
Yes, we can. Yeah, I mean, any of you who want to probe this deeper with me, I'm more than happy to have the conversation. There's so much research that's been done, interesting studies like a wine study set up in a supermarket with German wine and French wine, and they found that simply by changing the background music, playing French music, 77% of the wines that were sold that day were French. Switch it to German music, 72% of the wines that were sold were German wines. So just by changing the background music. What happens in a restaurant when we eat? When it's really loud, we eat more. So here's your sonic diet tip. Eat with earplugs, you'll tend to consume 30% less calories. But there's something else that happens too in noisy environments. It cuts the flavor of the food. So the food isn't as flavorful. In fact, we found ways to deduce what we call sonic seasonings. So we can change your perception of how sweet or sour or spicy or savory food is by what we put in your ears and not just what you're putting in your mouth. So I'm just scratching the surface of the power of sound to really shape our perception. So think about that in your visual advertising. We know from neuromarketing research that just by changing the soundtrack that's underneath your commercial, we can change where people look, how long they dwell, what the cognitive load is, their arousal state, and how they interpret the narrative of what they're seeing. So yeah, sounds extremely powerful.
Sound advice. Ty, there's so many things that I'd love to have you share on stage, but for today's conversation, we'll focus on the great recent research that we conducted together. If it's all right, I'll share a little bit. So the LinkedIn B2B Institute is LinkedIn's think tank, right? They're bringing to the marketplace thought leadership in order to transform our ability as marketers to leverage scientific insights to grow our B2B brands. $30 billion are spent on B2B advertising every year in the United States. $30 billion. Well, the B2B Institute called on MediaScience to collaborate on the largest neurometric, eye tracking, and human memory study for the B2B industry of all time. We measured 107 Fortune 50 brand ads within a simulation of the LinkedIn platform. We create simulations at MediaScience. And we used eye tracking, heart rate data, and sweat activity to measure people's non-conscious responses, and then we surveyed them for memory afterwards, right? And what we found, well, Ty, the research reveals that 81% of B2B ads fail at the most basic level, being noticed and remembered. So walk us through what this means for the billions spent on B2B advertising right now.
Well, first, if anyone is wondering how sweaty people get when they're watching B2B advertising, the answer is not very sweaty. But
You're on a mission to change that.
I want people to be like, yeah, spicy. Yeah, I don't know. But just that, what you've just shared is a staggering number that's spent on U.S. advertising. And $30 billion is a big number. And that's not even counting the energy that goes into crafting the creative, the time and effort that's spent there, much less than the media side of things. So with that much effort, what you don't want is to hear a number like that, 81%, you might as well just take that money and put it in a fire, right? We want it to actually land. So, how it's showing up, there are two things to think about. So one, only 53% of people are actually recognizing the ad. And then of that, only 19% of people actually recognize and are able to connect the brand to it. That is a problem. And so when you have people developing campaigns with, dozens of creative, hundreds of creative, you have like a compounding issue of time and energy being invested into this. And so I know we're going to get into it more in the conversation. But what we want to do is change people's approach so that they're able to actually break through. We want people to both connect with the ad and want it to hold their attention, and we want them to also connect with the brand. And that's going to require a pivot for people being more connected to the neuroscience aspects of how we should be thinking about branding.
No, absolutely. I mean, and going back to context, right? LinkedIn is an incredible platform. I think all of us are on LinkedIn today, right? I'm certainly on LinkedIn all the time, even if I don't post all the time. But what we found is that ads are on screen for 12.3 seconds. That is enough time to create a memory, but viewers are only giving 3.7 seconds of actual visual attention because it's across fragmented glances. So how should this fundamentally change how B2B marketers think about creative strategy?
Yeah. So I think it goes back to some of what you were saying in the introduction, just recognizing the realities of how people are interacting with their phone or with whatever technology they're viewing advertising on. So if you think about it, think about yourself, actually. If you're holding your phone and everyone's scrolling on LinkedIn, of course, scrolling through LinkedIn, maybe you see a post, maybe you see the ad, you jump back to the post, you go ahead a little bit, maybe then you go back to the ad. But the point being is that attention is actually fragmented. It's not a sustained, it's not like a movie that you're watching, it's sustained attention. It's fragmented. And so that means that we as marketers have to think about how we're showing up in each of those fragments.
Yeah.
We want to think about front loading the content. We want to make sure that the brand is in the frame so people can actually connect the brand to the message, that it just shifts the way we think about, how do you sustain attention? And as you said, build memory structure. So it's not just about people being aware of your brand or company, it's being aware of your brand or company associated with what?
Exactly.
What are you known for? How do you connect the message to the solution you offer? Because sometimes people can be aware, but then not know what it is that you do or how you can help solve a problem for them.
Absolutely, Ty. We're going to pivot back to B2B here shortly, but I do want to bring Benjamin into the ring, right? Benjamin is a dear friend of mine, head of research and insights at VAB now. Benjamin, what's the biggest misconception marketers still have about measurement today?
It's a great question, but I want to preface it by saying that marketers do get a lot right.
Yeah, they do.
Marketers are a critical component to our ecosystem.
Absolutely.
But one of the biggest misconceptions that I think marketers have and other players in the ecosystem have is that all impressions are created equal. That an impression on one platform may be equal to an impression on another. Right? We've even done studies or compiled research from 35 independent research entities with a report called You Ought to Know. And within that, we found that there are multiple components and aspects of a campaign that can impact the quality or the response that audiences have to that advertisement. One of those components could be screen size, right? Thinking about a pop-up ad that's intrusive on a desktop screen, or you're scrolling really quickly on your phone, or it's a small display ad on the top of a website that you're looking at on your laptop, versus, right, an ad filling the screen on a TV, right, a 55, 65-inch plus heartbeat of the home television that is within the home. right? So screen size, screen coverage, another one that I mentioned there, right? You're expecting that ad to come, and it fills the entire aspect of the screen, not just a single pixel or multiple small sets of pixels there, right? Screen coverage can also impact that attention and that response and that engagement that you might get from a particular ad. Context is a topic that's come up quite a bit here. Think about the power of you're watching the NBA playoffs. Right now we have the playoffs on, or the finals on. Right now, I'm sad the Knicks lost. We're gonna live with that. We're gonna keep moving forward. But right, you're watching Steph Curry, the Golden State Warriors. He shoots his three-point shot. Swish, it goes in. Timeout. Ad break. Now you see Steph Curry selling a Subway sandwich via Subway. Right? Look at that powerful context cue that occurs right there. How powerful can that be? So I'd also like to call out a recent study that was released by Bill Harvey, media research luminary, right? And he conducted a study that looked at $48 billion in ad spend against $3 trillion in outcomes. And what he found is that streaming TV that is professionally produced had an outsized impact on outcomes, driven by the emotional engagement that premium produced professional content can create in people and the way that they respond and buy after seeing those ads. So it's pretty apparent that, right, in the research that you've done here, right, that there are multiple components that create differential values in the impressions depending on where they are and how they're consumed.
No, absolutely, Benjamin. And for our audience, it is an evolving landscape. We came from a world of linear television, and now we're certainly in a world of connected television. And just to stay with you for a second, how is CTV reshaping the standards for audience targeting? Right. Certainly, we want to create premium viewing environments and use excitation to boost Stephen Curry's Subway advertisements. But we also but we also want to find the right audiences, right? So how is CTV reshaping the standards for audience targeting and effectiveness, and what should brands be doing differently now in this new era?
I'd like to start off answering that question by defining what CTV is. That's connected TV, and that is a television device that is connected to the internet. That can be a smart TV, right? That can be a regular television that's connected to an over-the-top device, like a Fire TV stick, an Apple TV. It could also be your television connected to a gaming system that's then connected to the internet, right? So I've just named 5 different types of CTV, right? Starting there, right? There's already fragmentation happening in the CTV ecosystem. There is a wide world of data that is coming from all of those different pieces, right? Let's think about how CTV is being consumed, right? The average adult spends 2.5 hours a day watching CTV. Advertisers are following suit, right? In 2025, $33 billion will be invested in CTV. That's double where it was 5 years ago, and that comprises 40% of the total TV marketplace. So CTV is obviously an incredibly important part of the video advertising and overarching video ecosystem. You can consume long-form content and short-form content, right? All of this creates opportunities for advertisers to connect with audiences. But again, you mentioned, right, how are we targeting these folks?
Yeah.
Right? There's tons of different data that can be leveraged, right, partnering with and can be accessed via direct or programmatic ecosystems. Right? And so when we start thinking about how you're buying it, that is an important aspect as well. But to really get to the crux of your question there, right, what about targeting? I think what's really interesting about CTV is that all of those data signals can create opportunities to target via context. So getting those emotional cues, right, something like an Iris ID or working with a partner like MediaScience to understand what emotional aspects are going to create the most powerful responses in your audiences. I think what's also a really exciting part about CTV is all the innovative ad formats that are happening. Right? We think about the split screen ads, we think about the shoppable interactive ads, pause ads, QR codes. Right? These are creating very powerful opportunities to create engaged audiences that are going to then take action. And when you can do that in a personalized way, utilizing that rich audience data to then serve an ad that you've tested creativity of being the most powerful compared to maybe creative A versus creative B or creative C, right? You know that creative execution is going to be the most impactful at driving engagement and driving awareness and brand recall. then you're hitting that sweet spot of serving the ad that matters most to that audience member. They feel it's personalized to them, they're engaging with it, and then they're taking action. So it can be a really powerful medium.
Absolutely, Benjamin. We need to look at this at a principle level first, right? The reason why we see ad innovation is because we need to use ad innovation to break up clutter, right? And clutter looks like frequency. Frequency is when you see the ad too many times, right? When we reformat the advertisement, it's like we're seeing it again with new eyes in some ways. Certainly ad formats matter, but creative certainly matters as well, right? Steve, your work on the sonic color line and voice bias in branding is incredibly timely. How should brands be thinking differently about the voices they use, especially in AI-driven media?
Yeah, I think the sonic diversity work grew out of something we were confronted with during COVID. We were all sitting at home, kind of isolated from each other. We're seeing a rise in audio consumption. Clubhouse, may it rest in peace, was booming. And then there was the murder of George Floyd.
Yeah.
And so as we were talking internally about what we were seeing in terms of audio listening and what was happening in the culture around us, we started thinking about diversity in advertising. And the fact that usually when we talk about diversity, we focus on what we see. But diversity can occur in what we hear as well. So starting to think about the voices that we're hearing, and it dawned on us as we kind of looked at an inventory of COVID messaging in those early days where everything started kind of sounding the same because there was the somber piano music, there was the we're in this together, there was kind of the intonation of the very intimate voice. But we became aware that while we had a pandemic that was affecting the Black community 3.5 times more than the white community, but the bulk of the voices that we were hearing were white voices. Why was that? So we launched into kind of looking at, could we create a business case for more diversity? We weren't looking at this in terms of segmentation. Market segmentation is a thing, and it works because we know we identify with different groups more than others. But we felt like if the only time we heard a voice of color was in a message to a market segment, we hadn't segmented the market, we'd segregated it. So how do we think of more diversity in general marketing? So we did a lot of research around that, and as we started to make a business case for that and get into the workplace to talk more about diversity in general market advertising, we saw the rise of AI was happening. So now we're starting to look at the AI voices. So we started to look at that through the lens of diversity too. What were the voices that we were hearing? There was also another really interesting piece of that was avatars started getting assigned to these voices. And so what were the choices being made about the color of the skin of the avatar versus the voice that we were beginning to hear there? And that pushed us to even start thinking about, well, what's the difference between a human and an AI voice? And just not to take up too much time with this, just some interesting highlights we found is that if we asked people if they thought they could tell the difference between a human and AI voice, the majority of them said yes. But when we tested it, we found that it was a flip of the coin as to whether or not they could really get it right. And then we used some neuroscience to look at implicit attraction to these voices, basically dimensions of positivity and trust. And what we found with AI voices was they scored really well. It wasn't like, they didn't score well on positivity and trust. They did. But what was interesting was on a subconscious level, human voices scored significantly better. Now, what we found over time is that gap is closing. that the voices are getting so good that we're seeing them perform almost as well, if not sometimes better than human voices. But here's the interesting takeaway that we need to remember. What we also discovered is that there is a bias, either anti-AI or pro-human, when we disclose that you're listening to an AI voice.
Exactly.
Trust and positivity drops. In fact, we would play people human voices and tell them it was AI. The trust in that voice dropped to the same level as AI. And we found that if we told people they were listening to an ad that was voiced by an AI voice, trust and positivity and favorability in that ad dropped. So the message there is, do you disclose that you're using AI or do you not? What happens if we enter a world of regulation where you have to tell people that it's AI? It's not that they aren't even emotionally connected to that voice. It's what happens when we prime them that they're listening to AI. So I'm going to stop there.
No. It's right on point. It's so topical. I mean, we are entering an age in which we have no roads. We don't know what the guardrails are in terms of perception, right? People make buying decisions based on priming, right? Where we show up and how we show up, in which context, it all matters, right? In fact, Ty and the B2B Institute just came out with an incredible study at the ANA Masters of B2B Marketing in Naples, Florida. And what they discovered was that 86% of B2B buyers start with a predetermined shortlist of just 2.8 brands. 86% of buyers start with a predetermined shortlist of 2.8 brands on average, and 92% of them choose from that initial list. So what does that mean for when and how brands should be investing in building mental availability?
Yeah.
I was surprised.
Yeah, that is a surprising, but also I'm a glass half full kind of girl, so I think there's actually a lot of opportunity in that. But it is connected to navigating bias and how the human brain works. So what we call that list is a day one list. And when people are making decisions, because we make shortcuts, we also tend to go with things that are familiar and comfortable to us. That's the reality of how the human brain works. It means a very short list. So that tends to be, it's the brands we remember, we're able to recall, and that we're also comfortable with. And so we say that the first search engine that people search when they're making a decision is the one in their mind. So a problem arises and they're saying, what do I already know or what's comfortable or familiar to me that will solve this problem? And even in a high consideration type of business, like banking, for example, like if we care where our money goes, how it's being managed, even in high consideration business areas, people still, then 92% of people still ultimately then choose one of the brands that they're already thinking about that we call them on that day one list.
Yeah.
So what that means for all of us is that we want to be on that day one list. The only way to do that is for us to start building mental availability with people before they're actually ready to make a buying decision. And so that's a matter of brand. That's actually a matter of memory generation. So we're actually investing now in future decisions and associations that people have in the brand. So when they're ready to make a decision, we are one of the brands that's considered. But to talk a little bit further, it's not just about being one of the brands for the target customers that you know you're going after. In B2B marketing, there's actually a committee of people making decisions. So it's not just like the IT decision maker that you are already thinking about in your mind. It's also legal, it's procurement. And if those people in the buying committee don't know anything about your brand, they can actually explode and derail the deal entirely. So our work is not only to build mental availability and de-risk the buying decision for the people we know, but it's also to be broadly mentally available and comfortable with the people that are in the hidden buyer as a part of the committee that's making the decision. So again, I'm a glass half full person. I think that is actually a huge opportunity for us to think about and intentionally pursue the things we want to be known for and build mental availability against those things.
No,
So that you
absolutely.
can be on that day one list.
Absolutely. I mean, there's this convergence that's taking place, right? The convergence is the construct of your brand, right? All of the memory structures, what it sounds like, what it feels like, and it's placed adjacent to what, right? These are contexts merging with each other, right? Video is so critical in that convergence. Benjamin, but we still have so many competing data sources and even methodologies in terms of identifying whether or not this is working in the first place. So how do you define truth in video measurement?
Truth in measurement is a tough one. And a little tidbit, when I worked at a measurement and attribution firm a few years ago, we would joke to ourselves, a little tongue-in-cheek, say, well, the only way to really know how somebody is responding to an ad is by sitting on the couch next to them, right? And it's kind of that's basically what you do here, which is really cool. But back to your original question there, the truth in measurement, I think it depends on your truth as a marketer, right? Because there are so many disparate sources of viewership, different platforms, people are accessing content of all different types. There's also so many different methodologies that can be applied there. So as a marketer, right, and a lot of our role as a VAB is often to shine a light on what those methodologies are, to shine a light on the types of questions that you should be asking to your measurement providers. Asking questions like, where is your viewership data or your ad exposure data coming from? What sources are you using? And then, how are you storing that data? How are you processing that data? How are you aligning that data to outcomes measurement or engagement, right? Or how are you testing all of these things together? How are you validating all this data together? So it's really important to be asking these types of questions and to be working with partners who are transparent, right? Working with measurement providers and platforms, right? We see time and time again, right, in the ad ecosystem, partners and platforms that don't allow for third-party measurement to play a role, right? That creates outsized issues for those advertisers that partner there, right? We've seen it in the headlines, we've seen it in studies, that when brands place their hard-earned dollars into that black box and allow anybody those dollars to end up, you don't know where it's going to go, and that can create brand safety issues. Right? There's a study that shows that 71% of audiences, if they see an ad next to nefarious content, they will stop buying from that particular brand. So brand safety issues aren't just, well, I don't want to be there. It's about how it primes and impacts the audiences themselves. Right? We also think about from a functional perspective, if you don't know where the ads are running, it can end up in fraudulent places. Right? You could expect your ad to be running in-stream, but it ends up running out-stream with the sound muted. Right? You would agree that if the sound is off, that ad is not going to be as impactful as the money you put in and you thought it would be. So these are really important aspects of the measurement, is that transparency is number one. And understanding how it works and ensuring that your ads are airing when and where you want them to.
And I'm going to stick with you for one more question as we're nearing the home stretch. It is a complex landscape, right? There's many different platforms that serve video. If you could wave a wand and just fix one thing about how measurement is discussed or implemented in boardrooms, what would it be?
There's a lot of things I would want to change, but I think conversations like this would be a really important and impactful part of those conversations in boardrooms. Right, at the boardroom level, it's often about the costs, right, about the CPM. But I think the CPM needs to be thought about more than just that lowest number achievable. It's about what is that true CPM that you're having. Having conversations around the creative, studying the creative. Which ones are going to be most impactful? How are they impacting brand recall? How are they impacting brand performance? Right, and when we think about those two, they work together. Right, Talia mentioned this, right? Investing now for the long term, not about reaching the lowest common denominator of cheap clicks. Right? It's about building that brand awareness, building that brand recall, so that you can't type in the name of the business that you've never heard of before.
Exactly.
Right? And without setting that groundwork, and I think that the idea of cost needs to play that more. Right? A true CPM needs to be a part of that conversation.
Man, I just brought so many all-stars. I'm so grateful that you guys are here today. This is our normal, conversation over drinks. Steve, I was lucky enough to attend Possible and, be hosted by SiriusXM. It was such an immersive experience. I hope all of you had the chance to interface with SiriusXM in the future. One of the most interesting things for me was that you used audio to not only change. We use audio to not only change our perceptions of taste, but the actual taste of food and beverage. Can you share a little bit about that study?
Sure. Well,
And that work?
in what you experienced as well, we've actually started looking at smell. So, been able to change your perception of aroma of coffee by what I'm putting in your ears and not just coffee in your nose. And I think, what we're doing is we're playing with memory structures that already exist. And I think, if this is kind of the opportunity to close with something, I think we've talked so much about memory today, which is really important. Advertising is all about memory. If you think about the funnel, which by the way is over 100 years old in print, and we've done not a very good job of evolving it. The upper part of the funnel, it's not awareness. It's creating memory structures. It's priming. The middle part of the funnel is nudging these associations all the time. And as you get to the end of the bottom part of the funnel, as you've said, 90% of folks have already made up their mind. You're not converting anybody. All you're doing is connecting that 5% that's ready to buy. So what are you doing in the funnel? You're encoding and decoding memory entirely. And we've talked a little bit about creative, and I think this is the piece that gets lost sometimes when we get enamored with the science. I'm a science guy, but I'm also a creative guy.
Yeah.
So I take what I call the Miles Davis approach to data. Don't play what's there, play what's not there. Data is not insights. You've got to pull insights from the data. And we get biased, particularly with things like targeting. A fascinating study that just came out from NC Solutions was asking marketers what they thought was most impactful in sales lift. 23% survey said that it was targeting. 21% said it was creative. And then when they looked at what actually had an impact on the sales lift, 11% was targeting, 49% was creative. So we have this built-in bias when we start chasing these short-term metrics that drives towards promotions, rational thinking, clicks. And the reality is it's the long-term metrics over time. It's that one great creative idea that cuts across every segment, every multicultural dimension. Don't even get me started on these crazy millennial Gen Z horoscopes that we fill. But it's the creative that's at the heart of all of this. And what the neuroscience and research can do is help us hone those creative ideas. But we gotta leave them time to breathe. We're so quick to abandon it. And in our fragmented media, we come up with all of these fragmented creative ideas instead of looking for how do we just optimize for the context, but how do we build the memory with something that we're hitting consumers with over and over and over again. So, sorry, got a little on a soapbox.
No, it's fantastic.
I'm passionate about this part of it. I don't think we talk about it.
No, I agree with you completely. Creative is critical, but there is structure to creative, right? Creative is made up by the colors, the shapes, the distinct mascots, the audio, etc. One thing that we found in our research with Ty, I think you should speak to this actually, is that we can't really own like colors, right? We can't own MediaScience blue, I'll do my best to, of course. But Ty, why don't you tell us a little bit more about
Yeah.
color?
Absolutely. So what you're speaking to is what we call distinctive brand assets. And, when you think about the science of building memory, creative is actually the biggest lever you have. Media is the other part of it. But if you're not able to build memory structures with the creative, it's really hard. So the distinctive brand assets gives you a lot to play with. As you said, colors, fonts, sonic, which is it's not utilized as much as it should be. I think all of us can recall a jingle we love, or even if I say Intel, I think people can hear the sound of the Intel jingle in your mind. There's these heavily,
Like a good neighbor.
So exactly right. So we should be doing this more, but it's also brand characters as well. Another underutilized area. You're talking back there. The insurance category does this extremely well. They have Emu, and Geico, Gecko. So we could be bringing more of these, what we call fluent devices, to our advertising. But as you said, one aspect of it doesn't work well alone. So, for example, color. Don't come for me. I know LinkedIn has blue also. But we are swimming in a sea of sameness when it comes to the way we use certain distinctive brand assets. If I showed you a bunch of blues that were connected to different brands, and I said, pick out which one is IBM, you'd be like, I'm not sure. So it's tough. So we want to think about using a constellation of distinctive brand assets. So it's not just the color, it's the font, it's all the things put together that helps you be distinct. And it's escape from the sea of sameness, but use a life preserver, go in a different direction. Think like if you're a bank, why not use the color pink for your brand or something? Why not think about a banana? I don't know, it just means kind of going in an unexpected direction to make it clear and distinct, and that's a huge area of opportunity. In particular, I would say characters and sonic in B2B. I think only 1% of B2B, if I'm recalling that statistic correctly, is using a character, it's really low. So that's a huge opportunity if you were to introduce a character, or even perhaps think about using some of the faces and people within your business to do that work as well.
Dynamite, don't you think? One thing that I listened to Jan speak on stage is that in this new world, right? Just think about it. As humans, as marketers, as business owners, as CEOs across finance and media and advertising and brands, right? We're entering an age with generative AI in which the playing field is somewhat leveled in some ways, right? All of us can create high quality assets, etc. Right? So how are we going to stand out in a sea of sameness when the bar has been metaphorically lifted, right? I think that it will be with thought leadership, right? Telling interesting stories, compelling stories that change the perception of our companies to audiences that actually do want some type of human connection rather than, a sea of sameness. Just to go back through the group, final question, unfortunately, and then we're going to head into the lab and networking. What are you most excited about, and what also are you fearful about in this, new media landscape? Benjamin.
I'm excited and fearful about the same thing, is the rate of change of where we are today in the industry and the world. So I think it's important that we continue to have these types of conversations. I think it's important that we continue to educate ourselves about multiple aspects of the advertising industry. So that's my short and sweet answer to that question.
Similar to you, I think, really thinking about AI, I'm excited about the potential, the application, ways that we can use it just to stretch things. But I'm also concerned about the implications of using AI. the implications for how it transforms the way we speak to each other, the implications for who's creating the AI, what's the training sets, and how that's affecting culture, and in how quickly things are developing. We're very often not getting the benefit of the long term to see what's happening. And I think this is where research is really important too, particularly with academics, that we begin to study what are the cultural effects, beyond just the ways it can optimize and create efficiencies. It's like, but what is it doing to us in the process? I think that's a really perplexing part.
So thank you, both of you, to Philip. But for this question, I think I'll start with what I'm concerned about. In part, we're addressing it by having this conversation here. We are human beings, and the technology of our brains is still what we had from the Stone Ages, right? Mm. But we are being confronted with space-age information coming at us, the fragmentation of attention and all sorts of different forces, economic, technological, that we're having to contend with and process and make sense of, and it's moving very quickly. So I think that more conversations need to be had about behavioral science, about human decision-making, about communities, the way people interact. We need to understand these things better. We need to understand messages, storytelling, the impact, the fragmentation. We need to understand that. And then I think the other part that's exciting to me is the fact that everyone in this room is actually a steward of that conversation. I don't know if you're a marketer, if you're a comms professional, if you're in research, we all are stewards of how this thing goes. Yeah. And therefore have a responsibility for how this ultimately lands. So working within a think tank, I told my team, we're a think tank, we have to think. We have to think and help people make sense of what's happening. We need to be thinking about, where the puck is going to be, 12 months from now to help people anticipate these things. And I think the other thing that's exciting to me and hopefully exciting to all of you is that there's a quote, if you want to predict the future, create it. So part of it is us thinking about what do we want to have happen, and then think about how do we steward things to be the type of world that we want to live in.
Absolutely. If we want paradise on Earth, we're going to have to build it. I've very much enjoyed this conversation. This is the convergence of great subject matter, right? Video, audio, for business needs and purposes, right? All of these things work together. There are multiple layers to this conversation. We should understand them so that we can master them and then use them as part of our toolbox. And that, my friends, I think is what I'm doing at MediaScience. I'm here to help you. We're here to help you as well. I'd like to thank our guests, Ty, Steve, Benjamin. What a great conversation. And thank you. And thank you, our audience. And with that, we're going to go on a lab tour and do some networking and eat some food. Thank you guys so much. Yeah.